My name is Nick Cimino, and I am the program chair for the Clayton Library Friends, and I have the honor and the privilege of introducing Susan Kaufman. As most of you already know, she is the senior manager of the Houston Public Library's Clayton Library Center for Genealogical Research here in Houston. She's an Illinois native. She has more than 30 years of experience as a genealogy librarian. In 1987, she started her career in Peoria, Illinois, working as a genealogy and reference librarian. She spent 6 years at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. You folks may know that that's on the list of top 10, along with the Clayton Library Center for Genealogical Research. She moved to Texas in 2004. She's been a presenter at a variety of local, state, and national genealogy conferences, and she's also held board positions with genealogy organizations in Illinois, Indiana, and Texas, and also at the national level. In 2019, Sue was awarded the National Genealogical Society ProQuest P. William Philby, which is a mouthful, but she also became a fellow of the Texas State Genealogical Society, and these honors were for outstanding service as a genealogy librarian and her service to family history researchers. She was also awarded the Lloyd DeWitt Bachstruck Distinguished Service Award. She's a past president of the Texas State Genealogical Society, who is hosting us on this webinar today, and she currently serves as its Director of Education, a member of the Texas Library Association and the American Library Association. Sue Kaufman, take it away.
All right. Today we're going to take a look at how to discover the story of you. So, you know, the pedigree chart is the story, but it really isn't a story. It's who's on the chart, and it's the beginning of the stories, but all it is just a name, dates, and places. There's nothing about what happened, you know, that dash. What does that dash mean? And honestly, when you look at this pedigree chart, everybody's eyes are going to roll, everybody's going to flee, and nobody wants to help and nobody wants to look. But remember, so when you start your stories, that's why the pedigree chart is important, because you look at the pedigree chart and you formulate your questions. Knowing what you want to know is the key to finding what you want. You have to figure out what you know. You want to work on your family history, that's huge, but I want to know about my grandfather. I want to know what the story was, why he came over, when he came over, what was it like when he came over. One of the things that you can do is to look at your pedigree chart, but then write down all the questions you have. And those questions become the guideposts to help you discover the answers. And these questions create a target of interest and a path to the questions and to the query that you're going to create. The questions, we're going to answer these questions in a larger societal context. This really isn't about it's really not about who was my grandfather. It's more about what was it like? Why did they come? Why did they live? How did they live? What were customs? And working within a social history context fills out the pedigree chart with stories. And these stories are different things. There are life cycle stories. There are stories about jobs. What did they do? Life at work. Our families lived through an economy. Our family lived through occupations. What kind of work did they do? What were those working conditions like? How did they go to work? Also, if we go and look at through community life, what about celebrations? What about holidays, traditions, education? What kind of languages? What was it like? How did they learn the language where they came? What kind of other things happened? What was going on in the community? What was going on in society? What about life at home? What were their clothings like? What were their fashion like? What kind of food did they eat? What kind of land did they have? What was the property like? Where were they living? What was like that? Also, what about game changers, war, immigration? How did they live through that? What about all the things that people lived through, like what we're living through now? Okay. And then also relationships. How were relationships found? How did they get married? What was the marriage ceremony like? What about what kind of customs did they have and other things like that? That's really important. And that's the story. That's the story behind that pedigree chart. So why do we want to do stories? Well, we want to do stories because there's a connection to them. If you tell a story and then you listen to a story, when you tell a story about your life or your family's life or your family history and you're talking to somebody, that creates that connection to people. They have maybe something similar or can add something or something different. What about your cultural heritage? Learn about others, learn about different cultures. There's a book called Death Warmed Over, which is actually a cookbook of funeral food and the food that different ethnicities brought to funerals. So learning about culture. It also educates people. Why did somebody come? Why did my ancestor come from Russia? Somebody might not know that. So it can educate other people as to why things happen. And then also, of course, there are variant views. How many of you have been sitting around the table and you tell a story, but then maybe one of your siblings tells a story or somebody else tells a story, and it's not the same thing? So that's why it's important to get a whole picture of stories and things like that that can help you with write that family history. All right. So we know that we want to share the stories. We know that the stories are important. We know that families' eyes glaze over when you create a pedigree chart and say, "Look at this." But how are we going to write the story and how can we find this? Now, before we really get into this, I want to talk about how writing can be overwhelming. Where do you start? That's a huge thing. Where am I going to start? So remember, you're going to want to take a little bite at a time. You're going to want to pick one question and you're going to want to do some research. You're going to write down a few paragraphs, like just like I want to work on my family history is huge. I want to write the story of my family history is huge, but I want to write about my grandfather coming over. I want to write about how I grew up and what was going on, because remember, we become ancestors. Yeah, right? So we become ancestors. People are always like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. We do become ancestors. And as much as we sometimes wish our ancestors would have left those stories, remember the people that come behind us might want to leave and listen to our stories. So it's really important to do that. So, how many of you remember this card catalog, right? Haven't seen one of those in a long time. I can remember when I went to Fort Wayne in 1999, we had just moved over to the computer and to an online catalog, and we actually took those drawers and dumped them out. I hear the collective gasp. Yes, we dumped them out, and that was the end of the card catalog. But if you remember using these card catalogs, write down that story. Write it down. It's really super simple. I'm going to write the time about going to my neighborhood library when I was younger. There's a story for you. All right. So let's look at some of the books that can be found most often in a neighborhood library or through Amazon, I suppose, that can help you write that story. And remember, sometimes you still have to use books because not everything is on the internet. All right. So let's talk about this. This is actually one of the seminal books about how to get the best idea to write your story and to bring social history into your family. This is called Bringing Your Family History Life Through Social History. It is on your handout. But when you look at pictures, you're going to want to look at the background. Look at the background of that photo. All those things are stories, and they're going to give you ideas. How many of you took trips in your family car with a bunch of you in the car? Okay, there's a story. So this actually book is a comprehensive, detailed guide on how to train yourself to notice ordinary things such as artifacts, historical meanings within your photos, the beginning of those stories. It's kind of like when you look at a document, or you look at a photo, you don't just look at it. You want to look at it. You want to look at that story. You want to create that story behind the photos and notice the things in it. To maybe place the photo, of course, that's another presentation altogether, but look at those things. So let's look at some books that you can find on the regular library shelves. So we all have families in history. Reading a book about that time period can give you narrative for your family history. These books are not going to give you names, dates, and places, but they can uncover some of the society things that were going on that will help you write that story of your family. And remember, we're doing family history. So that word history is really super important. So here, just in a regular library, there's books on the 1920s, there's books on the 1960s, there's of course things that are going on in the 1940s, and then there's plenty of other history books that you can look at. And then also in a children's department or in a young person's department, you might find some books like that that can give you some basic history of what was going on at a time, and you can put your family in that context. Also, here are some books. These are travel books. So you wouldn't think the travel books, learning about going to a place, well, we're not traveling, so we can only wish now or hope or plan. But this is the book on Russia, and we can see over in the right-hand corner that in this travel guide to Russia, there was a timeline of what was going on in Russia at that time period. So interestingly, my family comes from Russia, and in 1896, we can see that there was, of course, the problems going on in Russia, and there was a tragedy and things like that. That might be a reason why your ancestor left the country of origin. And then also early history. You'll see early history in some of those travel guides. Well, you might want to ask, what could be in a medical section for your family history? Okay. Well, beyond finding medical terminology, you might find some interesting observations about medicine or conditions in the Middle Ages. Kind of like this picture, pouring out of the waste into the streets that have aqueducts, which then, of course, the wastewater and the rainwater just flowed through the cities. Now, that's kind of gross, right? But how many of you have small, let's say boys, or even my 19-year-old nephew who is not interested in family history? You show this picture and attach it to your family that might have been living in the Middle Ages or different times like that, and the conditions, and you're going to get somebody interested. You're going to get somebody, wow, can you imagine living like that? So there's the narrative of how things go. Also, cookbooks. Romanian, I'm Romanian, there's a taste of Romania, but then also here's a book on Scandinavia, and interestingly, in this cookbook, they also have crafts. So you can find these kind of things and then bring in your ethnic history to your children, to your grandchildren, and create these crafts and create these foods and tell the story that you remember of your ancestors and when you went through these things. It's really super important to do that, because in this fast-paced world, which fortunately I suppose is a little slower now, we're losing a lot of our ethnicity, and it's really important to show that to the next generations and keep that alive. Also, I'm Russian, and so here's another Russian heritage cookbook. But although this isn't a book, you can see the website address down there on the bottom. At Family Search, there is a section called Discovery. And in the Discovery, so it's familysearch.org/discovery, there is a section where you can choose your ethnic costume, and you can, through your computer camera or your phone, put your face inside the ethnic costume. That 3% is that I was only 3% Russian. But how cool is that? You could do that with the kids, and then you could do homeschooling. There you go. You put yourself in your ethnic costume, and then you read history about the country, and there you got a lesson. So that's kind of cool. I thought that was really cool. So let's talk about some the electronic resources that we have at the library too, because what you're going to want to do is there are also ebooks and other things like that that we have at the library that can help you with some background through your family history. One of the things that I did want to mention is that through our ebooks, we have magazines. There are different ebook opportunities, e-magazine opportunities. There's RB Digital through the library, which has fiction and magazines. There's Access 360, which are current books. And we put a lot of social history books there in Access 360 through the library through Clayton. There's Overdrive, which is historical, classical, and nature books. And then you can find out which one has magazines and other things like that. If you do not have a Houston Public Library card, when you go to our library website, I'll show it in a little while, but at houstonlibrary.org, in the upper left-hand corner, it will say get a My Link card. Anybody in Texas can get a Houston Public Library card to access the ebooks, to access our online sources. And if you are out of state, you can pay $40 annually for a Houston Public Library card. So there are some advantages to getting that, and there's a lot of things. One of the examples that I have is Victoriana. So this is a magazine that comes through our e-resources, and in this magazine you'll see that there's home and garden, fashion, antiques, crafts, making recipes from 1860 in that area, old-fashioned lemonade recipes you can find from Victoriana. And in Victoriana also there are riding habits, different clothes. So you've got somebody over in that area in that time period and they had horses, maybe that's what they looked like. How about Restored South Carolina Plantation House? Again, putting pictures and ideas to your pedigree chart. And if you are so inclined, a lot of you know that I have cats. See, I got it in. I got the cats in. How to make a Victorian pet collar. I think one of my cats would look lovely in that. But how cool would that be? Again, the crafts. So this magazine, which is just one example of some of the things that you can get through our e-resources, provides everything from decorating to fashion and even the private lives of the Victorians. And then also there's a blog that you can link through from there also. So that's just an idea of some of the books that you can use to find social history, some of the online book resources that we have at the library to do that. And now I want to talk about some online sources specifically about social history. There is a website called Jstor. Some of you might be familiar with it. There are two ways to access it. You can actually access it through our library research and then databases by category, or you can go directly to Jstor and set up your own account. It is a scholarly journal archive covering information in the arts, science, business, history, education, and a lot more. There are other things like books, primary sources, and journal articles. But when you say academic, you automatically think that it might not be something for us, but there are state historical society periodicals on there. There are genealogy quarterlies like William and Mary. There are archaeology magazines, and a lot of these what seem to be scholarly give background on area, on culture, on groups, and on history. You know, with some of those state historical societies, there might be history about events that happened in the state, archaeological studies of land, that type of thing. Again, a lot of background. You can set up an individual account, which will then keep your history. So when you do go to Jstor, remember, and with every other website, you should not just look at that box and put something in it, but scroll down and learn about the website that you're operating with. This is another website called American Centuries. It features a digital collection of approximately 2,000 objects and has transcribed document pages. And this comes from the Memorial Hall Museum and Library in Deerfield, Massachusetts. For those, again, for teachers who are doing homeschooling, there's a lot of primary resources. There's curricula there. There's interactive student activities, and most of them are presented in an age-appropriate, user-friendly format. But again, just for us, we could see some of these online exhibits, turns of the century, history lessons, but things to do, and then collections. See that little place there that says our online collections? Search those collections. Again, take pictures and put them into your family history to bring that family history to life. If you Google social history, what comes up also are blogs and other information about social history and doing social history, and then social history websites. There specifically is one called The Social Historian, which has stories, articles about world history, death in the time of cholera. This is an old slide. Boy, who knew that that was going to be sort of just, I guess, like today, just I can't even think of the word. I guess appropriate would be a word. So there are other things, but then also there also is a social history blog. One of the interesting things here is a quick list of the 17th century euphemisms for being drunk. So again, teaching and putting in things that will give your ancestors life. They might have said something like this. They might have said to have a piece of bread and cheese in your head. Drunk. He's drunk more than he has bled. Wow, that's kind of interesting. So you can find these medical terminologies, you can find these phrases, and again, wouldn't it be fun to bring all these things in and then have this table going with your, well, I guess maybe a Zoom meeting now with your family. Here's some things that they said in the 1700s from our great, 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 great grandfather, and this is the way they might have talked. You teach the kids to talk like that, and that'll be fun. They'll be walking around the house talking in 17th century English. All right, so here are some other digital collections. American Memory is a gateway to the Library of Congress's vast resources of digitized American historical materials. So there's over more than 9,000 million items that document U.S. history and culture, and it's organized into more than 100 thematic collections based on format or on their subject matter or some other things, who created them, who donated them to them. They include manuscripts, photographs, posters, sound recordings, motion pictures, books, sheet music, and you can drill down to find the subject section. You can see, you can go in that way, see like there's cartoons there, there's posters, portrait photographs, social and business history, local history, and folk life. If I go to the local history and folk life section, I come up with the Alan Lomax collection of Michigan and Wisconsin recordings. Wouldn't that be neat to listen to some of the music that maybe they heard while they were up in Wisconsin or Michigan at that time period, field recordings? How about Travels to America, 1750 to 1920? That's an interesting piece because during the immigration of people coming to America, 253 published narratives by Americans and foreign visitors recounting their travels to the colonies and the United States. That would give us a picture for sure of what it was like when our ancestors came over. In addition to that, there's also at the American Memory, California as I saw it, first-person narratives of California's early years, 1849 to 1900. So there's a lot of pictures there, and during the gold rush, I know it's after the gold rush, but that might also give a little context to what happened in California if you have ancestors that went to California during that time period. Also, panoramic photographs. I love panoramic photographs. Again, giving somebody a visual as to where somebody was living and what it might be like at, during that time period and what they saw. The American Memory Project is the larger project on the federal government size. There are also state memory projects. You can do a Google search for a state memory project, and you'll see Indiana memory, Florida memory. In a Florida memory state project, they have actually digital images of a funeral home records. So you never know what you're going to find. This is Digital North Carolina. And it comes from the University of North Carolina Wilson Special Collections Library. And they scan, describe, and publish historical materials online. There also is another website, and it's in your handout. I don't have a slide of it. It's called the Digital Public Library of America. The Digital Public Library of America is a hub for a lot of state memory projects, but then a lot of public libraries, university libraries, and historical societies that put digital material there. The Digital Public Library is actually a hub, and so when you click on a piece of digital material, it takes you actually to the owning institution for the image itself. So the digital is like a clearinghouse. But here at Digital North Carolina, as an example, you can see that there are yearbooks, there are newspapers, there are images, there's city directories, scrapbooks, manuscripts, ledgers, audio-visual material. So those state memory projects, the Digital Public Library, the state memory projects, the American Memory Project, all will give you pieces to fill in that family story. The New York Public Library digital collections contains almost 900,000 items. So while that's a small fraction of the overall New York Public Library collections, it's representative of all those digital and vast collections that they have. And in addition to that, this is a lesson about, although it's the New York Public Library, public libraries, and especially big public libraries like that, like we do here, collect things from all over. So happens that in the New York Public Library digital collection, these are maps of Chicago. So you never know what you're going to find anywhere. That's why it's important to look at the website and not just put that name or not just put that place, more so in a social history search, of what you're researching. Understand what it holds. Because if you're not going to find anything, is it because it doesn't hold it? Or it isn't there, holdings, that's its library ease, because that material that you're looking for is not there? Or is it because you're not researching correctly? So understanding what you're looking at is also a key to finding out what you want to know. Some of you might have some of you might have coal mining families. This happens to be the Kentucky Coal Mining History website. But in addition, remember that just because it's Kentucky, although there is obviously history about the Kentucky coal mining industry, you can take that information from this website about the towns, about the living conditions, about the working conditions, photos, the pictures. You can take this website and you can still pull some of that information into your family history. So just because it's Kentucky, the larger thing is coal mining. If you've got Kentucky coal mining history, there's the website for you. Okay, let's talk about clothes. What did your ancestor wear? Just one website that might help is the fashion era. You can also do a Google search for what were the fashions in 1880, what were the fashions in Wisconsin, so you'll be able to narrow it down. But this specific website provides vision into fashion history. So there are different eras, and they look at women's costumes and fashion history to analyze the mood of an era. So not only are you getting pictures and information about the fashion, you're getting as to the why and to some of the values and some of the politics that contributed to these lifestyle trends, which influenced the clothes that women wore. Also here, I just, drilled down a little farther into the website, and you can see across the top, I could have found some information about coats. I found some information about hair and hats, different time periods. So you can see the different style. If you notice across that bar, you can see undergarments. I decided not to use that in my slides because I was a little worried about what they might say or what they might show. But it's interesting, right? Remember Scarlett O'Hara, or just those time of the different fashion of how many of us would want to wear a girdle now with bones in it pulled tight that we can't breathe? How many of you are wearing sweatpants, and how many of you have put sweatpants on for the past 6 weeks? Yeah, okay. I don't think I'd want a bone girdle around my waist at this time period. That's for sure. All right. So let's talk about this. How many of you know that your ancestors had dogs? So I thought that that would be kind of interesting because a lot of us have pets. And I was wondering if there were any documents that showed pets or information about pets. I actually went to the Family Search catalog and put in tax records because people had to pay taxes for dogs, kind of like the rabies tag and the dog licenses that we have now. And I wondered what kind of documentation there might be that might give me some information about maybe a family and what kind of dog they had. So in the Family Search catalog, up came some records that had dog taxes. And then there are also sometimes dog taxes mixed inside with county history, county clerk records, with other tax records, with birth, death, marriage. When you start looking at the Family Search catalog, you'll see that they're there. So I sent away for the film. It was a long time ago when we used to send away for the film, and I found some. And in Alabama, they had dog tax abstracts. Well, it didn't give me what I wanted. All it gave me, which was useful, now this is not my family, but it is useful because it is listing people in a place in a time period. This happens to be 1917, which is a good time period in between censuses, but I'm not finding out what kind of dog it was. I'm finding how many they had, which I suppose is interesting and informational, but I wanted to know, how could I find out if one of my ancestors had a dog and what it looked like? Remember, there's always variations in records. Here is a registry of dog licenses from Ireland from 1874. I got it off of Find My Past, which we have at the library, but unfortunately it's not remote. And here it's telling me, lo and behold, these people, and it tells me what their dog looked like. I was very excited. So you can see that across the top, it's a dog. It's gray and it's a terrier. There's brown mongrels. Again, it just gives us a larger picture other than that pedigree chart, which is really kind of boring. But they had dogs. Why did they have dogs? Maybe they were hunters. See, all records lead to more questions. That's the one thing about family history. There's always questions. There's always another question. All right, one of my favorite things, food. When I was growing up, the first thing we did when I went home was I went to the refrigerator. First thing when I came home, to see what kind of food mom would have, because mom would always have better food than I had. So it obviously plays an important part of memories in the family. And so there is a website called the Food Timeline. And if we look at the timeline when things were developed, we can see here that, different things that were developed at different times. And here we have, let's see, Ritz crackers came along in 1934, chicken Kiev, 1937. We got ugly fruit was identified in 1939. How about, I wonder when green goddess dressing came along. We always had green goddess, 1937. Just kind of interesting. How does that fit into your family story? Okay. And then, of course, we also have, whoops, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. This is one of the best parts. Oops. Technology. Spam, right? How many of you are rolling your eyes and laughing and remembering stories about spam? Okay, spam had a special place on our national table in culinary folklore. So there were all kinds of things. How about spam advertisements and things like that, or recipes? Okay, recipes, a full color picture of recipes. How remember Women's Day magazine, November 1938, hot Velveeta spamwiches. Now, just in case you want to know that, so you can make it for lunch today, a hot Velveeta spamwich is 2 pieces of spam, thin, on toast with tomato, with an onion or a pickle. And then you put the Velveeta on it and you place it in the oven until it melts. How about spam and eggs? Spam and eggs, spam and eggs. Diced spam, put it in scrambled eggs. Spam burgers, spam and spaghetti. Recently, I have even seen commercials just recently for spam. So it's still around. How about you can make spam and you score it and you put little cloves in it and then you cook it. There is a holiday meal, all kinds of different things. So the food timeline. How many of you thought eating around the table, whatever it was? So there is a story that you can write about. It's not overwhelming to do. Okay. The National Museum of Funeral History was founded in 1992. It's up here in Houston, up on 1960. It's very interesting. You see, there's a picture of different caskets, different hearses, those type of things. So it was developed by a gentleman. His name was Waltrip, and he started collecting artifacts that were otherwise being discarded. And it became a place to preserve actually the history of the industry. But when you go up there again, you can look at things and see this is how they did stuff. Like embalming was really a response to the Civil War, although it did exist in Egypt with mummification. But in the United States, it's because they had to send the bodies back. So there's all kinds of history that you can come up with to make the pedigree chart come alive. So some of this stuff is digitized, but then also there are museums. So this is from the Chicago History Museum, and I think we look at the little red wagon and think that Chicago actually during a time period during the Great Depression emerged as a vibrant center of streamlined design. This is a streamlined wagon. So showcased at the 1933-1934 World's Fair, that streamlined material was displayed and could show different people about the enormous popularity of companies that were creating things that were stylish yet affordable. The radio flyer wagons, you'll see also Sunbeam appliances. That thing in the center, actually, I was told is like a jute box that would sit on tables. But remember Wrigley's gum, new microphones, and then, like I said, the Sunbeam appliances. And some of these remain still today modern icons. This exhibit online features nearly 300 objects, and it's called Modern by Design. So all these things, again, evoke stories and bring back memories. Another thing that you can do is you could actually go to the Family Search Wiki and start researching your area of interest. But then one of the things that the Family Search Wiki does is it gives you links for other places. See that archives and libraries link? That goes right to different archives. It gives a list of archives and libraries. And when you begin to look through archives and libraries online, you want to start looking for the terms special collections. You want to start looking for the terms digital collections, because that is going to get you into that digital material. But then also Family Search also during the wiki will give you links to directories that could help you. So using that Family Search Wiki can lead you to digital material that will help you find stories. This is just, I put this presentation together, and part of this is because I just want to show you that number one, Google is our friend. And when you have a question, you can go out to Google, because that's really basically what I did for this presentation, was go out to Google and find things that would help me with social history. and putting in an area and a time period and the word digital collections will get you there so you can have that supplemental material for your pedigree chart. And now I want to show you how easy this is to do, okay? Because I'm only third generation American. My ancestors didn't come over until the late 1800s, early 1900s. So I do not have a lot of historical United States material, but I have these stories, and I have these stories that were passed down to me from my grandmother, and then things that happened to me or that were told to me or that part of my life that I wanted to share. I put this part of the presentation together pretty quickly. I would say maybe in a half hour or so, just by Googling some of the things that happened to me in my life. So I'm going to give you that example of how simple this could be. Okay. All right. So when I was born in 1960, and I was born at Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge, Illinois. My mother always told me that I was the first red-haired baby at the hospital. I kind of didn't believe her because, I mean, come on, I know that redheads are kind of rare, but I couldn't have been the first red-haired baby at the hospital. Well, I went to look for the history of Park Ridge, where the hospital was that I was born, and it says, if you can see down on the bottom, it says that Lutheran General Hospital relocated from Chicago in 1959. Okay, I was born in March of 1960 in Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge. And because we're kind of rare as a redhead, it very well might have been that I was the first red-haired baby because I was born in March. So that's only 3 months. I don't know what month the hospital moved, but that story, we might never be able to find definitive, like a marriage record or a death record, to back up the story, but this piece of information makes it more plausible. Also, here is stuff I just put what happened on the day of history. I was born 1960, March 11th. March 11th, Pioneer 5 launched into solar orbit between Earth and Venus. But then also there are other events, and again, that will also help fill out that family story of what was going on at that time period. When I was born, and I was born in Park Ridge, like I said, we lived in Elk Grove Village, which is outside of Chicago, a little northwest of Chicago, west of Chicago. And Elk Grove Village, okay, and it is adjacent to O'Hare. Whoops. This is what O'Hare looked like in 1960, right? Again, I got the hospital, I got Elk Grove, I got O'Hare, and we also fed the elks when we were little. So this is a more modern picture, but this is an experience that I had. Another experience that I had was Chicago in 1967, 1968. That is not me, but that was me with the big snow in 1968. And then also, we might remember the Democratic National Convention in 1968. I lived probably about 25, 30 miles from downtown, but I can remember my mother, she really didn't want us to go out because of what was happening during that time period. And then I also remember the way the city looked when it snowed, right? I really do kind of miss it, actually, believe it or not. I know a lot of you are going, oh no, I don't miss that. But I do miss the seasons, and that was part of fun stuff. Here is the Chicago History Museum images. When we were little, we used to go ice skating at Lincoln Park. For those of you that know Chicago, this is right on sort of by where Wrigley Field is, but just right on the lake on Addison or in Irving Park. This actually is a picture from 1910, but that I guess, I don't know what you call it, maybe clubhouse or whatever, still existed, and we would go in there and drink hot chocolate when we were little. So that is something that we did also. And then also, what about this? That's not me, but I sat in that car seat. Pretty safe, right? Right? And then also my mother had a red Galaxy like that. Remember the phones? We had the dial phone, and then boy, when you got a push button phone, you were like the coolest thing in the world. And then we also went shopping at Jewel. We're going to Jewel. We're going to Jewel. We never go into the grocery store. We're always going to Jewel. Just interesting memories that, you know, maybe we need to share, Also, I have here a day in a life. I went to the American Jewish Museum, History Museum in Philadelphia. Yeah, in Philadelphia just recently. And my ancestors moved into New York, and there's a picture of a tenement, and there's a picture of a table on Sabbath day and what it looked like. That very well might be what it is, what it looked like. This is the 1940 census of New York, and on it is what is highlighted is my family. My father is Howard there, who is 9. And on the left-hand side, he lived on Bedford Avenue. So I decided to look a little about some of my father's history. And I was looking at the census and to weave my father's story. My father grew up in Brooklyn. That's the Brooklyn Dodger Stadium. My father grew up on Sheepshead Bay. On the right-hand side is Sheepshead Bay. There was a history of Bedford Avenue on Brooklyn Inc. So I got that, and I got some of those pictures. We talked about that's Ebbets Field. I went to the New York Public Library digital collections and got that picture of Sheepshead Bay. I did Wikipedia and I got Ebbets Field. That's how I got that picture. And then back on the New York Public Library digital collection is a map of the neighborhood that he grew up in. Also, through the telephone directory, now I know it's a little fuzzy in Brooklyn, but on the right-hand side, I'm sorry because I had to blow it up so big, is my grandfather and the phone number that he had there in Brooklyn. And then we took a trip, and that's my father in front of the house. So there's that story. So I got pictures of what he saw, I got pictures of where he lived, and then I got a picture of him in front of that house that he grew up in on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn and Sheepshead Bay. Just another quick example, you talked about, I mentioned my grandfather coming over from Russia. My grandmother, and the story was always my great-grandfather, Sam, who I'm named after, came from Russia through Liverpool into the United States, into Chicago, and my great-grandfather escaped Russia in women's clothing. Well, this is his naturalization, and if you look, it says that he's a lady's tailor. The story becomes plausible. Not really any documentation, but plausibility. There is my great-grandfather in front of his ladies' tailor shop on Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago. My cousin had that picture. I never even saw that picture. And then here is the phone directory, or the city directory actually, for Chicago for that time period in the 30s, I think it is. And again, with his address on Milwaukee Avenue, there is a Milwaukee Avenue map, aerial, and the map itself where the area was. And then also on your handout, there is a website called Timelines, History Timelines, I think it's called. It's a subscription site, but you can do one free. And then I got a timeline of what was going on during my great-grandfather's life. So we have our pedigree chart, but I have made my pedigree chart come alive with that last part of the stories. So when you look at a pedigree chart and you look at the picture of my sister and I, you can feel that deeper connection because you heard a story to go along with that pedigree chart. And now you can see why I mentioned at the very beginning that I look like I just got off the boat from Russia. So I invite all of you to tell those stories of your family through the information that you learned here today and the information that you have and from the memories that you carry, and spend some time writing those stories because that's what this is all about. It's a family history. So thanks, you guys, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and be safe. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. That was great.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Sue?
So I have a question for Sue. Sue, do you think that the Museum of Funeral History would be open to donations?
You know, interestingly, Nick, you know, they have an archive up there. Some of you might know Liz Sargent, who used to be here at Houston Public at HMRC, the Houston Metropolitan Research Center. She was the archivist there. So I don't know. So they have a library, and they have, you know, the guy who started the museum, is it Service Corps International Service Corporation, a big funeral business? That's how it's attached to the two things. So they might call them.
Yeah,
That
I
would be
will.
my suggestion. Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, my grandfather was an embalmer and a funeral director in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And I have his original certificates, and they're huge. It's like, I mean, I have a digital image. I'm okay with that. They can have the originals.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, I don't know, you know, so it's always worth a phone call.
Okay, there was one question from someone about what was used to set up collages of photos.
On my slides, I used PowerPoint, and I just layered them over and over and over. I do that a lot. That's how I use it. Yeah, everything was done in PowerPoint with just layers, and then I use the animation.
Oh, okay, excellent. Now, Elsa wanted to know if there's any websites you talked about that stand out to you as being especially useful and fascinating.
Any like the American Memory, the state memory projects, those, and then the Digital Public Library of America, and then just Googling, you know, like a university in the area that you're researching. The Digital Public Library is really sort of the mother of all digital websites because it takes you to different partners. That would be a good place to start, but special collections at libraries, digital collections.
And I want to thank Sue for just a great presentation. We really thank the Texas Genealogical Society for providing this technology to us and guiding us through it and helping us. We could not have had this meeting without them and without you. And please, would like to hear from you about what you liked and maybe didn't like, but what your thoughts are about the use of this technology in the future.